Imagine a man locked in a dungeon so dark, so cold, that hope itself seems to vanish into the stone walls. His crime? Spreading a message that shook an empire to its core? How did a fierce enemy of a fledgling faith become its greatest champion, only to face the wrath of Rome's most ruthless ruler? Welcome to the story of Paul, a tale of blinding light, relentless courage, and a death that changed the world. Why would an emperor fear a chained preacher enough to silence him forever? Stay with us to uncover the secrets of a journey that turned darkness into dawn. Before we begin, if you're ready to dive into this epic saga, hit that like button to show your support. It helps us bring more stories like this to you. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of history and faith unfolding. Now let's step into the streets of Jerusalem, where a man named Saul was about to meet his destiny. In the shadow of Jerusalem's ancient walls, a young man named Saul carved his name into the fears of a fragile new movement. A scholar of unmatched zeal, trained in the rigorous traditions of the Pharisees, Saul saw himself as a guardian of truth, wielding the law like a sharpened sword. To him, the followers of Jesus, a carpenter crucified as a criminal, were a dangerous sect, their whispers of resurrection a poison seeping into the heart of Judaism. With the high priest's approval, Saul unleashed a campaign of terror. Imagine the narrow streets at dusk, where lamplight flickered against stone houses. Saul's footsteps echoed as he stormed into homes, his eyes blazing with conviction. Families praying in secret were torn apart, fathers shackled, mothers pleading, children trembling as soldiers dragged them to dank cells. Synagogues, once places of worship, became arenas of judgment, where Saul's voice rang out, condemning believers to chains or worse. One day stands out in this grim saga, the death of Stephen, a radiant young preacher whose words cut through Jerusalem's crowds like sunlight. As Stephen spoke of a risen Savior, a mob rose against him, their shouts drowning his testimony. Stones flew, blood stained the earth, and Stephen fell, his final breath a prayer for his attackers' forgiveness. Saul stood nearby, holding the coats of those hurling stones, his face unyielding. Did a shadow of unease stir within him as Stephen's eyes shone with unearthly peace? If it did, Saul buried it deep. Instead, he doubled his efforts, vowing to crush this rebellion before it spread further. Believers fled Jerusalem, scattering to Judea and Samaria, their hearts heavy but their faith unbroken. Saul's name became a curse among them, a specter that haunted their dreams. Why would a man of such learning pour his soul into destruction? Perhaps he believed he was saving his people, purifying their faith. Yet every step he took was leading him toward a moment he could never foresee. Saul's ambition grew boundless. Armed with letters from the temple authorities, he set his sights on Damascus, a vibrant trade hub where rumors of the way had taken root. The journey was long, the desert sun relentless, but Saul's purpose burned hotter. He would root out these heretics no matter the cost. Could such a man, so certain of his path, ever be swayed? The question lingered like dust in the air, unanswered until the road to Damascus became a stage for the divine. The caravan to Damascus pressed forward under a merciless noon sky, the horizon wavering in the heat. Saul rode with purpose, his mind fixed on the task ahead. Then, in an instant, the world dissolved into fire. A radiance beyond imagining erupted around him, as if the stars themselves had descended. Saul collapsed to the ground, his hands clawing at the earth, his breath stolen by the weight of the light. A voice thundered, not from the air, but from within his soul. "Saul, why do you wage war against me?" Heart pounding, he gasped, "Who are you, Lord?" The answer struck like lightning. "I am Jesus, the one you hunt." In that moment, Saul's certainties shattered. The man he had called a myth, a deceiver, was alive, speaking, claiming him as his own. Blinded by the vision, Saul staggered into Damascus, led by companions who trembled at what they'd witnessed. For 3 days, he sat in a stranger's house, his eyes useless, his stomach empty. Darkness enveloped more than his sight. It seeped into his thoughts. Every arrest he'd ordered, every cry he'd ignored, replayed in his mind. Had he been the villain in a story he didn't understand? Doubt wrestled with pride, faith with fear. Meanwhile, in the same city, a disciple named Ananias faced a test of courage. A divine whisper urged him to find Saul, the man whose name spelled death. Ananias hesitated. How could he trust this enemy? Yet obeying the call, he entered the house, his voice steady despite his trembling heart. "Brother Saul," he said, placing hands on the broken man, "the Lord who met you on the road has sent me. See again and rise for him." Light flooded Saul's eyes as if a curtain had been torn away. Baptized in water, he rose reborn. No longer Saul the persecutor, but Paul, a vessel of a mission he could scarcely grasp. What does it mean to have your world undone in a single breath? Paul's transformation was no mere change of heart. It was a rebirth, a collision of heaven and earth. Yet trust came slowly. When he stood in Damascus synagogues, proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God, jaws dropped. Was this a trick? A madness? His words carried fire, but so did the threats against him. Old allies turned enemies, plotting his death. In a twist of irony, Paul, once the hunter, fled through the night, lowered in a basket over the city walls like a fugitive. The man who had bound others was now bound to a new calling, one that would lead him into the unknown. But where would this path take him? The answer lay in the cities and seas beyond. With a heart remade, Paul set out to carry a message he once despised. Joined by Barnabas, a man of quiet strength, he ventured into the wilds of Asia Minor, where cities like Antioch, Pisidia, Iconium, and Lystra thrived on trade and tradition. In Antioch, Paul entered synagogues with a boldness that silenced crowds. He wove ancient prophecies into a story of a Savior who defeated death, offering hope to all who listen. Some hearts opened, merchants, widows, seekers, drawn to a love that crossed borders. But others bristled, their voices sharp with accusation. "This man twists our scriptures." Tensions flared, and soon words became threats. In the market squares, whispers grew into shouts, warning Paul to leave or face the consequences. In Iconium, the air grew heavier. Paul and Barnabas preached to packed gatherings, their words sparking both wonder and rage. A plot surfaced, men with stones in hand, ready to silence the newcomers. The two fled under cover of night, their hearts pounding but their mission unbroken. Lystra, a city of farmers and shrines, brought a stranger trial. When Paul prayed over a man lame since birth, the man leaped to his feet, his laughter echoing through the streets. The crowd gasped, their awe turning to frenzy. "These are gods among us," they cried, naming Paul as Hermes, the swift-tongued messenger, and Barnabas as Zeus, king of the heavens. Priests rushed forward with garlands and oxen, eager to sacrifice. Paul tore his cloak, his voice raw with urgency. "Stop! We're mortals like you, sent to show you the God who made all things." For a moment the crowd wavered, but deception stirred. Travelers from Antioch arrived, poisoning minds with lies. The same hands that offered flowers now clutched stones. Paul fell under a hail of rocks, his body crumpling to the dust. Dragged beyond the city gates, he lay still, blood pooling beneath him. Then came a moment no one expected. As disciples gathered, weeping over their fallen teacher, Paul's eyes flickered open. Bruised and battered, he rose, brushing dirt from his torn clothes. With a defiance that stunned all, he walked back into Lystra, his gaze steady, his purpose unshaken. What kind of man could face death and return with such fire? In every city, Paul left more than words. He left communities, fragile but fierce, bound by a faith that defied fear. His message rang clear. God's grace was for everyone, no matter their past or place. But each step drew him deeper into a world that resisted his truth. Where would this courage lead him next? The seas were calling and a new land awaited. As Paul traveled through Asia Minor, a restless spirit stirred within him. One night, in the quiet of prayer, a vision broke through. A man from Macedonia stood before him, his voice urgent. "Cross the sea and save us." The call was undeniable, a divine compass pointing west. With Barnabas and new companions like Silas, Paul boarded a ship, the waves of the Aegean carrying him toward uncharted shores. Europe, a land of philosophers and emperors, lay open, unaware of the fire about to ignite. In Philippi, Paul found an unexpected ally by a riverbank. Lydia, a merchant of purple cloth, whose open heart welcomed his words. Her home became a sanctuary, the first spark of a new community. But peace was fleeting. When Paul cast out a spirit from a slave girl, freeing her from torment, her owners roared with fury, their profits gone. They seized him and Silas, hauling them before a jeering crowd. Beaten with rods, their backs raw, the two were thrown into Philippi's prison, their ankles locked in wooden stocks. Darkness swallowed the cell, yet Paul and Silas did more than endure. They sang. Hymns rose raw and defiant, weaving hope into the night. Then a miracle shook the earth. The ground quaked, chains clattered to the stone floor, and doors swung wide. The jailer, sword in hand, ready to end his life in shame, stopped as Paul called out, "We're still here." Falling to his knees, the man whispered, "What must I do to find life?" Paul's answer was simple: believe in Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your house. By morning, a jailer's family joined the faith, baptized in joy. Who could have foreseen a prison becoming a place of rebirth? From Philippi, Paul pressed to Athens, a city of ideas carved in marble. At the Areopagus, surrounded by skeptics and scholars, he pointed to their altar inscribed to an unknown God. With words both gentle and piercing, he unveiled a creator who needed no temples, a savior who rose to offer life. Some scoffed, but others followed, their minds alight with questions. In Corinth, Paul stayed longer, hammering tent stakes by day and building a community by night. For 18 months, he poured his soul into a city of sailors and seekers, forging bonds that would endure. Every step in Europe was a risk: new tongues, new gods, new threats. Yet Paul's vision never wavered, a world where every heart could know grace. But as he looked west, did he sense the shadow of Rome growing nearer, a city that would test his faith like never before? The journey was far from over, and greater trials loomed. The air in Jerusalem hummed with tension as Paul stepped back into the city that had once known him as Saul, the relentless hunter. Now, years after his transformation, he returned not to destroy but to unite, carrying gifts for the poor and a heart full of hope. Yet the streets that once echoed his commands now whispered suspicion. Rumors swirled among the temple crowds. This man, they said, preached against the sacred law, urging Jews to abandon their heritage. Paul, sensing the growing unrest, sought peace. He joined a ritual of purification at the temple, his head bowed in reverence, hoping to calm the storm. But peace was a fleeting dream. On a sunlit afternoon, as incense drifted through the holy courts, a group of travelers from Asia spotted him. Their shouts pierced the air. "This is the traitor who defiles our faith." Like sparks on dry grass, their words ignited a mob. Chaos erupted. Hands seized Paul, dragging him from the temple's sacred stones. Fists flew, sandals pounded, and cries for blood filled the air. The city that had cradled his youth now turned predator, its rage a tidal wave threatening to crush him. Just as the mob closed in, Roman soldiers stormed the scene, their armor glinting under the sun. A commander, mistaking Paul for a rebel-stirring revolt, ordered him bound in chains. As iron bit into his wrists, Paul spoke with startling calm, revealing his Roman citizenship, a shield against hasty punishment. The soldiers hesitated, their grip loosening, but the crowd's fury only grew. From the steps of the Antonia fortress, Paul raised his voice, speaking in their tongue, pleading to share his story. For a moment, silence held, until he spoke of his mission to the Gentiles. The word sparked a roar. "Away with him! He's not fit to live!" What drove such hatred against a man offering love? The answer lay in hearts hardened by fear, unable to see the bridge Paul built between worlds. The Romans, desperate to quell the uproar, whisked Paul away. But danger lingered. That night, a chilling plot emerged. 40 men swore an oath, vowing to neither eat nor drink until Paul's blood stained the earth. Their plan was cunning: lure him to a council meeting, then strike on the road. But a whisper reached the commander's ears, carried by Paul's young nephew, who overheard the scheme. In a daring move, the Romans assembled a midnight escort, hundreds of soldiers, spears gleaming, to spirit Paul out of Jerusalem's grasp. As hooves thundered through the dark, did Paul sense the divine hand guiding him? The city faded behind him, but its shadow would follow, trailing him to a new battleground. The coastal city of Caesarea, with its marble halls and sea breezes, became Paul's next stage. Held in the governor's palace, he awaited trial under Felix, a man known for cunning as much as cruelty. 5 days later, Jerusalem's leaders arrived, their accusations sharp as knives. This man spreads chaos across the empire, leading a sect that threatens our way of life. Their words painted Paul as a firebrand, a danger to Rome's order. Standing before the court, Paul's voice was steady, his eyes unwavering. He spoke of his devotion to the law, his peaceful actions in Jerusalem, and the hope that fueled him, a hope rooted in a risen Savior. Felix, intrigued but unmoved, delayed judgment, sensing profit in prolonging the case. Was he hoping for a bribe, a common coin in Caesarea's politics? Paul remained in chains, yet his cell became a sanctuary where he spoke with Felix and his wife Drusilla about justice, purity, and a coming day of reckoning. 2 years passed, a blur of guarded walks and quiet prayers. Felix's successor, Festus, inherited the case, but the air grew heavier. Jerusalem's leaders pressed anew, demanding Paul return to their city for trial, a trap cloaked in piety. Festus, eager to win favor, proposed the idea, but Paul saw through the guise. With a voice that cut through the chamber, he declared, "I stand before Rome's justice, not Jerusalem's schemes. If I've broken the law, I'll face death, but I appeal to Caesar." The room stilled. An appeal to the emperor was no small thing. It thrust Paul onto a path none could reverse. Festus, bound by law, agreed, but curiosity lingered. Why would a prisoner risk everything for a distant throne? Days later, King Agrippa and his sister Bernice arrived, their robes shimmering in Caesarea's halls. Festus, puzzled by Paul's case, invited Agrippa to hear the prisoner. Before a crowd of officials, Paul stood, his chains clinking softly. He spoke not as a defendant, but as a herald, tracing his journey from Pharisee to preacher, from blindness to vision. His words wove a tapestry of divine purpose, culminating in a Savior who broke death's chains. Agrippa, versed in Jewish ways, leaned forward, captivated. When Paul proclaimed that all must turn to this light, Festus laughed. "Your learning has driven you mad." Paul's reply was gentle but firm. "I speak truth, and you know it, King." The room buzzed. Had Paul's words pierced too deep? Agrippa's parting words hinted at possibility. This man could be free, if not for his appeal. Yet Paul's course was set. Could a single voice sway the tides of power? Caesarea's courts faded, but a greater stage awaited. The journey to Rome began with a creaking ship and a restless sea. Paul, now a prisoner among prisoners, sailed under the watch of Julius, a centurion whose stern face hid a spark of kindness. From Caesarea's harbor, they hugged the coast, docking at Sidon, where Julius allowed Paul to visit friends, a rare mercy. The ship pressed on, battling headwinds that slowed their path. At Myra, they boarded a larger vessel, its hold heavy with grain, bound for Italy's shores. But autumn's chill brought warning. The seas grew wild, and the Day of Atonement had passed, signaling danger for sailors. Paul, no stranger to hardship, spoke up. This voyage courts disaster. Ship, cargo, lives, all at risk. His words hung heavy, but the captain and crew, eager for profit, dismissed him. A gentle breeze lured them onward, promising safe harbor at Crete's Phoenix Bay. Did Paul sense the storm brewing beyond the horizon? The sea, like fate, held its secrets close. No sooner had they sailed than the sky turned traitor. A gale roared from the northeast, its howl swallowing the crew's shouts. Waves towered, tossing the ship like a leaf. Sails tore, timbers groaned, and panic seized the men. Paul stood steady, his face lit by flashes of lightning, as if anchored by an unseen force. Days bled into nights, the sun and stars lost behind a curtain of clouds. Cargo was jettisoned, then gear, as hope slipped beneath the waves. Starving and soaked, the crew despaired, but Paul rose amidst the chaos. "Take heart," he said, his voice cutting through the storm's din. "A messenger from God stood by me last night, promising I'll stand before Caesar, and all of you will live." His certainty stunned them. Was this prisoner their prophet now? On the 14th night, sailors sensed land, their ropes measuring shallower depths. Fearing jagged rocks, they dropped anchors, praying for dawn. Some plotted escape, lowering a lifeboat under cover of darkness. But Paul's warning stopped them. "Stay, or none will survive." Julius, trusting him, ordered the boat cut loose, its splash a surrender to fate. As morning neared, Paul urged all 276 souls to eat, breaking bread with a prayer that steadied trembling hands. When dawn broke, a bay appeared, its beach a faint hope. The crew cut anchors, raised a sail, and aimed for shore, only to strike a reef. The ship shuddered, its bow lodged, its stern splintering under crashing waves. Soldiers drew swords, ready to kill the prisoners rather than let them flee. But Julius stayed their hands, honoring Paul's promise. Some swam, others clung to planks, and every soul reached land, soaked but alive, on the island of Malta. What power held them through such fury? Paul's faith had become their lifeline, but greater wonders awaited. Malta's shores welcomed the shipwrecked with warmth. The islanders kindled fires against the rain, their faces glowing with curiosity. Paul, ever active, gathered wood, only to jolt back as a viper lunged from the flames, its fangs sinking into his hand. Gasps rose. Surely this man was cursed, marked by fate for death. Yet Paul shook the snake into the fire, his skin unmarred, his calm unbroken. Murmurs turned to awe. "He's no mortal. He's touched by the divine." Word spread, and soon Publius, the island's leader, invited Paul to his home. There Publius's father lay frail, racked by fever. Paul knelt, his hands gentle, his prayers fervent. The man rose, color flooding his cheeks, and gratitude filled the house. Others came, bearing ailments and left whole, their voices weaving Paul's name into Malta's story. For 3 months, the island became a haven, its people equipping Paul for the journey ahead. Could a shipwreck become a sanctuary? Malta whispered, yes. From Malta, a new ship carried Paul to Italy, docking at Puteoli, where believers welcomed him like a brother. The road to Rome stretched before him, its dust mingling with the weight of destiny. In the capital, Paul was granted a rare freedom, not a cell, but a house guarded yet open. He wasted no time, summoning Jewish leaders to his side. "I've done no wrong," he said, "yet I'm bound for the hope I share with you." They listened, intrigued, for no letters condemned him. Days later, a larger crowd gathered, and Paul spoke from dawn to dusk, tracing God's promises through prophets to a Savior who lived again. Some nodded, their hearts stirred. Others turned away unconvinced. Still, Paul's door remained open, his words a beacon for any who sought him. In those early months, Rome seemed a platform, not a prison. But how long could such freedom last in a city ruled by whispers of fire and fear? The horizon darkened, and Paul's greatest test loomed unseen. In the summer of 64, Rome burned. Flames leaped from the Circus Maximus, devouring shops, homes, and temples with a hunger that spared little. For 6 days and nights, the eternal city choked on ash, its skies painted red as 10 of 14 districts crumbled. Paul, confined to a rented house under guard, could only watch as cries of panic echoed beyond his walls. The Emperor Nero, absent at first, returned to a capital in ruins, his face a mask of concern as he opened his gardens to the homeless and promised aid. But whispers crept through the rubble, dark rumors that Nero himself had kindled the blaze, craving space for a golden palace to crown his vanity. True or not, the gossip clung like smoke, threatening his grip on power. Desperate to shift blame, Nero sought a scapegoat, and his gaze fell on a group already distrusted, the followers of a crucified teacher known for their strange gatherings and refusal to bow to Rome's gods. The accusation landed like a thunderbolt. Christians, Nero declared, were the arsonists, enemies of the empire's glory. Arrests swept the city, swift and merciless. Neighbors turned on neighbors, pointing fingers to save themselves. Believers were torn from their homes, their cries lost in the clamor of vengeance. The emperor's wrath took grotesque forms. Some were draped in animal hides, thrown to ravenous dogs that tore flesh from bone. Others were bound to crosses, their bodies writhing in agony. Many were coated in pitch, set alight as living torches to illuminate Nero's gardens. The city that Paul had hoped to enlighten now glowed with the fires of persecution. Why would an emperor target a faith so small, so peaceful? Perhaps he feared its quiet power, a message that placed a heavenly king above his throne. For Paul, the relative freedom of his house arrest vanished. As a leader among these believers, his name rose to the top of Rome's list of threats. Could one man's voice withstand an empire's fury? The answer lay in a prison carved from stone. The shift was sudden. Soldiers came at dawn, their boots heavy on the floor, dragging Paul from his modest lodging. No longer a guest in Rome, he was now its enemy, marked for a fate reserved for those who dared defy the emperor's will. The city's streets, still scarred by fire, watched in silence as he was led away, his chains a grim omen of what awaited. Yet even as darkness gathered, Paul's heart held fast, anchored by a purpose no flame could consume. Rome had burned, but a greater fire, the one he carried, still flickered, ready to blaze one final time. Deep beneath Rome's Capitoline Hill lay the Mamertine Prison, a name that struck fear into the hearts of those who heard it. This was no ordinary jail, but a tomb for the empire's foes, rebels, traitors, and now a preacher of a forbidden faith. Paul was lowered into its depths through a narrow hole, the stone walls closing around him like a grave. The air was thick, damp with the stench of decay, unbroken by any ray of sun. Above, a single grate offered faint echoes of the world, cartwheels, distant shouts, but below, only shadows reigned. The cell's floor, slick with moisture, chilled Paul's bones, while chains bound his wrists, their weight a constant reminder of his fate. Here in this forgotten corner of Rome, time slowed, each moment stretching into eternity. What could sustain a man in such despair? The answer was etched in Paul's every breath, a faith that turned even dungeons into sanctuaries. In this isolation, Paul's mind turned to his scattered flock. With a quill and flickering lamp, he penned his final words to Timothy, a young disciple he loved like a son. The ink flowed with urgency. I'm nearing the end, poured out like an offering. I've run my race, kept my trust. His letters spoke of battles won, not with swords but with love, and of a crown awaiting beyond the grave. Yet sorrow threaded his words. Many had fled as persecution tightened its grip. Only Luke stays with me, he wrote, a quiet ache beneath his courage. He asked for a cloak left in Troas, a small plea that revealed the cold biting his aging frame. Did he shiver as he wrote, imagining the faces of those he'd led to faith? In the Mamertine's gloom, Paul's spirit shone, weaving hope where despair should have ruled. Tradition whispers of another presence in that prison. Peter, the fisherman turned apostle, bound like Paul in Rome's cruel embrace. Though no scroll confirms their meeting, the thought of these two giants, different in voice yet one in purpose, sharing words of strength, stirs the heart. Could they have clasped hands through the dark, their prayers a defiance of the chains? Whether true or not, Paul's solitude was not empty. He carried memories of countless souls, merchants in Corinth, widows in Philippi, sailors spared on Malta, who bore the light he shared. The Mamertine held his body, but his spirit roamed free, reaching for one last stand. How could a man write of victory in such a place? The answer lay not in the stone around him, but in the fire within. The day of judgment came, unheralded by trumpets or crowds. Paul was led from the Mamertine to the Roman Forum, the heart of imperial justice, where marble columns stood like silent judges. This was no public spectacle, no mob to sway, only a closed chamber where Rome's power weighed its verdicts. The charges against Paul had grown heavy, stirring rebellion, leading a sect that mocked the emperor's divinity, perhaps even plotting the fire that scarred the city. Each accusation was a thread in a noose, tightened by Nero's paranoia. Yet Paul stood tall, his frame worn, but his eyes alight with purpose. Before the tribunal, he was not a prisoner pleading for mercy, but a herald proclaiming a truth greater than Rome's might. What could drive a man to face death with such boldness? The answer lay in the story he told one last time to ears that might never hear. Paul spoke of a king not bound by palaces, a savior who conquered death to offer life. His words, honed by years of preaching, flowed with a clarity that pierced the chamber's chill. He recounted his calling, not born of ambition, but of a light that reshaped his soul. The officials listened, some with furrowed brows, others with guarded glances. Did they sense the weight of his conviction, the power of a faith that defied their swords? One account suggests Paul's voice grew softer, addressing not just the judges but the emperor himself, urging a turn from darkness. The audacity stunned. Here was a chained man preaching to Rome's heart. Yet Nero's empire demanded loyalty, and Paul's claim of a higher lord was treason in all but name. The verdict loomed as certain as the dawn. When the sentence fell, death by the sword, Paul received it without flinching. As a Roman citizen, he was spared the cross, granted a swift end rather than the torment of others. His lips, perhaps, curved in a quiet peace, echoing words he'd written. "To live is my Lord, to die is my gain." The chamber emptied, the scribes recording another name among the condemned. But had Paul's words planted a seed, even in one heart? The question lingered, unanswered, as soldiers prepared for the final march. Rome's justice had spoken, but another voice, one eternal, still echoed in the apostle's soul, guiding him to his last horizon. The morning was crisp, Rome's streets alive with merchants and travelers, unaware of the drama unfolding. Paul, wrist-bound, walked with soldiers along the Ostian Way, a road stretching toward the sea. His steps were steady, his face calm, as if he saw beyond the dust and stone to a destination no blade could touch. The city's grandeur, temples gleaming, statues towering, stood in stark contrast to the man in chains. Yet Paul carried a dignity that outshone marble. Scattered among the passers-by, a few believers may have watched, their hearts breaking yet silent to avoid Rome's wrath. Did they see in Paul's gaze the same fire that had drawn them to faith? Their presence, unseen by history, was a quiet testament to his impact, a whisper of hope amidst despair. Tradition paints a poignant scene on that road. A Roman woman, moved by pity, stepped forward, her name lost to time, but called Plautilla in later tales. She offered a veil, soft and fine, to shield Paul's eyes at the end. He accepted with a nod, promising to return it, a vow that seemed impossible. Was there a flicker of kindness in her gaze, a crack in Rome's iron heart? The procession moved on, leaving the city's noise behind, until it reached a quiet grove known as Aqua Salvia, where clear springs bubbled from the earth. Here, far from Rome's clamor, the final act would unfold. The soldiers prepared an execution block, its wood worn by countless ends. Paul knelt, the ground cool beneath him, and asked for a moment to pray. His voice rose, steady and clear, not for himself alone, but for the believers he'd leave behind, for churches stretching from Jerusalem to Corinth, and, astonishingly, for Nero, the man who condemned him. The words hung in the air, a challenge to hatred itself. A sword flashed, its edge catching the morning light. With one swift stroke, Paul's life ended, his body falling to the earth. Yet tradition tells of a wonder. Where his head touched the ground, 3 springs burst forth, their waters flowing as if to mark a sacred moment. The soldiers stood silent, perhaps unnerved by a man who died without fear. Those few believers, risking all, gathered his remains, burying them in a simple grave along the Ostian Way. Could a single death ripple through time? The springs, later called 3 fountains, whispered yes, drawing pilgrims to a site where faith outlasted steel. Paul's voice was stilled, but its echo was only beginning, carried by letters and lives that would shape a world. Paul's life ended under a Roman blade, but his story was only beginning. From a hunter of believers to a herald of hope, he carried a message that no chain, no storm, no emperor could silence. His letters, penned in shadows, became pillars of a faith that spans centuries, lighting paths from Rome's ashes to every corner of the globe. Nero's empire crumbled, his name fading into infamy, but Paul's fire burns on, in churches he never saw, in hearts he never met. What makes a man give everything for a truth he once rejected? We invite you to share your thoughts below. What inspires you most about Paul's journey? Your comments keep this story alive. If this tale moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. It means the world to us. Share this video with someone who loves history or faith, and if you haven't already, subscribe and tap the bell to catch our latest episodes. We're diving into more stories of courage and conviction, and we'd love for you to join us. Until next time, stay curious, keep the faith, and we'll see you in the next video.